Good afternoon. I'm Mitchell J. Brown, council member for the City of Columbus, and I want to thank you all for attending today's public hearing to discuss the recommendations of the HeartSafe Columbus Taskforce. Just a reminder, any person who takes any action to obstruct or interfere with the conduct of today's meeting may be charged with disturbing a lawful meeting pursuant to Columbus City Code 2317.12. And any person who enters the areas of this hearing room reserved for city officials or invited guests may be charged with criminal trespass pursuant to Columbus City Code 2311.21. Copies of today's agenda and the recommendations of the HeartSafe Columbus Task Force are available at the entrance of the room. Sudden cardiac arrest and cardiovascular disease are the #1 cause of death in the United States. Annually, over 350,000 cardiac arrests occur outside of the hospital settings in the United States, with a mortality rate of nearly 90%. In Columbus, our residents suffer nearly 600 out-of-hospital cardiac arrests annually, with only 12% of patients being successfully discharged from the hospital. The HeartSafe Columbus Task Force was created to identify strategies to enhance survival from out-of-hospital sudden cardiac arrest by increasing early bystander engagement in CPR and AED deployment. Early response is the key to improving survival outcomes and quality of life following a sudden cardiac arrest event. Today, the HeartSafe Columbus Task Force will be presenting their recommendations for strategies to make our community one of the safest in the country to suffer an out-of-hospital sudden cardiac arrest. I would first like to provide an opportunity to hear from a survivor and advocate, Ms. Gail Hogan. Ms. Hogan, the floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me here today. I appreciate it. My story was in 1988, I suffered sudden cardiac arrest. And I was working at NBC4, and I was fortunate enough to have a building full of people who knew what to do because they had been trained previously in CPR. So for 35 minutes, they gave me CPR because there weren't medics at every fire station. And Dr. Kecak, you know, we've changed that immensely. So now people don't have to wait as long to get the attention that they need. But not everyone was as fortunate as me, and I'm standing here today because of those 5 people who gave me CPR. Working through decades with the American Heart Association, what I've been trying to do is to promote awareness and education of the benefits of CPR. And going into businesses and other places, you become to realize how many people don't know CPR. But when the American Heart Association released new research and new guidelines for CPR, and it had to be only hands-on, and that worked, it opened up a whole new world for us. It was a new ball game because people who might be afraid of helping someone they don't know and putting their mouth on someone they don't know didn't have to do that anymore. So we took away a huge barrier. But in that, and even though we've trained many people on hands-only CPR, there are still many people who haven't done it or done it once, so they may have been trained but forgotten, or others that haven't been trained. And just knowing that picking up the phone and dialing 911 could dispatch medics, but also have that person on the line to offer information, and maybe more importantly, because I've seen this in training, the confidence to these people to say, you can do this. The encouragement of that person on the line saying, how can I help you? This is all you need to do. You can do this. Because so many times, fear is what people experience. I might do something wrong. I might hurt someone. Fear of the unknown. So they don't take action. And having someone on the phone line who can guide them through that is very important. The other thing is AEDs. When I would go to businesses or organizations to teach CPR, and I would say, there's a CPR in this building. How many of you know where it is? And guess how many hands would go up? So they don't even know where it is, much less how to use it. So if we were able to identify to these folks and say, hey, keep doing what you're doing, see if you can find someone to help you. And if they can find someone, say, we know there's an AED on the 2nd floor, bring it down. I'll talk you through how to use it. It's not hard. I can't tell you how many lives we would save. I applaud you all for what you are doing and where we have taken the city in this regards over the decades, and I appreciate being part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I would like to introduce Dr. David Kecak, our Medical Director of the Columbus Division of Fire and Chair of the HeartSafe Columbus Task Force, to introduce the recommendations. Dr. Kecak.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown, and thank you for giving us this invitation to form this task force to address this very serious public health epidemic. And just like we identified the opiate use disorder and overdose situation as a public health epidemic, we need to identify sudden cardiac arrest as a public health epidemic. And just like we engage the public with Narcan that they could administer to opiate overdoses, so must we engage the public in utilizing the two things that have been proven to save a life in sudden cardiac arrest. And Ms. Hogan articulated them very well. Early CPR and early defibrillation. And those are skills that can be taught to anyone, not a doctor, not a nurse, not a paramedic. It doesn't have to be that. It can be any ordinary citizen. It can be taught these skills. And so this task force was designed to address the things that would impact survival in sudden cardiac arrest. So we divided our task force into subcommittees with the chairperson for each subcommittee. And so I'm going to start off by introducing the chairperson of the subcommittee for bystander CPR and have him give you their recommendations, and that would be Firefighter Robert Kelly.
Thank you, Dr. Kecak. As studies have shown, for every minute someone is suffering cardiac arrest without CPR, their chance of survival drops 10%. Our subcommittee was tasked with ways we can come together as a city to bridge the gap between the time somebody experiences sudden cardiac arrest and the arrival of advanced life support. Our recommendations are broke down into subcategories, the first one being public involvement. With public involvement, we broke our group down into two subcategories, businesses and faith-based organizations. We want to partner with businesses in the city of Columbus, both large and small, to provide hands-only training through a train-the-trainer model. This model would have members of local businesses who wish to champion the cause become trained in how to go back to their business and teach their fellow associates CPR. Faith-based organizations, partnering with Bread and other entities to reach out to faith-based organizations, to bring them in, identify members of their congregations, to again, utilizing the train-the-trainer model, to teach them how to do CPR and how to go back to their churches, their organizations, and teach others. We also recommend continuing our partnership with The Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center interns and teaching hands-only CPR at various OSU sporting events throughout the year. Their model has guided us to then reach out to the Columbus Clippers, Columbus Crew, and Columbus Blue Jackets to include hands-only CPR training at their various sporting events throughout the city. The city of Columbus itself should lead by example. We have already started this process. All new hires for the city of Columbus from February 2019 are receiving hands-only CPR training by CFD personnel during their orientation. Citywide training is also offering to all city employees the availability to come to the Division of Fire Training Academy and take a certified CPR course through the American Heart Association. We have also partnered with the Columbus Police to provide training to their personnel. More details on that will be in that subcommittee report. This training cannot happen without equipment. We are fortunate the American Heart Association has graciously already donated 20 CPR and school kits to this cause. We recommend securing funding of $5,000 to purchase additional equipment. This equipment can be loaned out to our faith-based partners and business partners to go back to their organizations and provide this life-saving training. Now, all of this training requires data. We need to collect data to see whether this training is actually providing a difference in the lives of the citizens of Columbus. Our recommendation is to continue to utilize the American Heart Association database in combination with the Columbus Division of Fire Census Tract data to gauge the impact that this program is having in our communities, our businesses, and our organizations. The community impact of these implementations are unimaginable. Imagine walking into Kroger's or Giant Eagle or your local grocery store with the knowledge that every member is trained in CPR. Should you suffer a sudden cardiac arrest, as Ms. Hogan and other members of our community have, and anyone in that store could start hands-only CPR. So the next steps for our implementation would be to reach out to our business partners and faith-based organizations to institute our train-the-trainer sessions and to secure funding for equipment to be loaned out. Our next presenter is Lieutenant Matt Parrish.
Thanks, Bob. My subcommittee was AED Placement Subcommittee, and we used the Columbus Division of Fire data to analyze where the majority of our cardiac arrests were occurring in the community. The target area for our AED deployment is highlighted in a heat map that's in the packet. And many of these areas that were identified are areas where some of our most vulnerable residents live and the social equality of health is predominantly lower. One of the main obstacles in establishing good AED coverage for these areas is that they are mostly residential properties and small storefronts and personal service businesses. So not a lot of great public access to AEDs in these areas. To overcome these obstacles, the committee recommendations will rely heavily upon the efforts of some of the other subcommittees driven by the areas where we target to get AEDs more readily available. So the recommendations for our objectives to overcome these gaps, number one was to establish a need-based financial co-op assistance program for any business in the target area that are willing to participate in the public access campaign and list their AED on the registry, to support law enforcement AED deployment in these targeted areas, to explore securable AED placement at public access points such as bus stops, park and ride locations, public bike rental locations, any private community resource center that has 24-hour access. To establish a financial co-op assistance program for our churches and places of worship in the targeted areas, and to engage our community partners to advocate for placement of AEDs with the members of their respective organizations. So for examples, maybe a trade exhort organization or the realtors organization, maybe realtors could carry them on their car while they're out showing houses in the community. To develop a sustainable model for implementation and continued maintenance of the AEDs. So it's one thing to get these into the community, but there is some maintenance associated with it, so we need to make it sustainable. And as crazy as it sounds, to explore some future deployment models, including drone AED delivery in targeted areas, and also to look at other mobile deployment options, maybe including Uber, Lyft, some of the taxis, and the Coda buses, because they're in and out of these communities. So that's what our subcommittee recommendations were, and I am passing on to the AED Registry Subcommittee, and that's Assistant Chief Richard Ballard.
Lieutenant Parrish. Councilmember Brown, committee members, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time this afternoon. As previously stated, early defibrillation dramatically increases the chance of survival for cardiac arrest victims. The AED Registry plays a critical role in getting the AED to the scene of an emergency. The AED subcommittee studied two major registry systems, Pulse Point and Atris. Both of these systems have automated notifications for notifying members of the public that CPR is needed. Both of these systems are also capable of providing AED locations to 911 dispatchers. The Columbus Fire Department is a participant in the Pulse Point Respond mobile app. This smartphone app allows users to view basic information about emergency calls in Columbus. As a participating agency in Pulse Point Respond, we receive free access to the Pulse Point AED Registry system. The Atris system, the registry, is also free. However, there's a $14,000 a year cost to link it with CAD. The AED Registry Subcommittee recommends that we continue to utilize the Pulse Point AED Registry. And now we will hear from the Law Enforcement Subcommittee, Lieutenant Dennis Jeffrey, Columbus Division of Police.
Thank you, Chief. I was honored to be part of this committee, and you might ask yourself why, as a police officer up here with all the EMS and fire personnel, and really because our officers have really changed their function a lot. Now in law enforcement, we're doing things that typically we hadn't done, and this is one of them, and it makes some sense. The officers are already out in the community. They can easily respond, whereas you might call EMS. It takes some time to get there. Our officers are already out in the community, so it makes, I think, a lot of sense to do this. So our committee looked at basically two initiatives. One of them is to train all our officers and civilian personnel in hands-only CPR, and the second is to provide additional AEDs to officers and cruisers. We already have 36 AEDs out in the community in cruisers as we speak, and we feel that adding additional ones will only enhance the initiative and save people's lives. So hands-only CPR, like I mentioned, we have 2,200 employees who work in a variety of settings in the community with the division, and by training them in hands-only CPR would definitely be a true force multiplier. We have over 900 police officers in patrol. So obviously if we train them, they're out in the community, they can respond immediately. In addition, these officers work a lot of special duty, as we know, throughout the community. So if you think about the officer working at Kroger or Giant Eagle, that officer's trained, it just adds to that number of people that can do this immediately. The way we would do this, we would identify about 20 police officers that would be trainers. These individuals will be trained by Columbus fire personnel. And then we have annual firearms qualification where every single officer has to come and qualify with firearm. We thought that'd be a natural nexus to train every officer. So they would do their firearms training and then do the hands-only CPR training. And every year we would add that component as a retraining to our scenario. We do scenario training every year. So we would build scenarios where the officer has to maybe interact with someone, then have to do hands-only CPR. So we think it'd be a great way to refresh their memory and skill set. The AEDs and cruisers, like I mentioned, we already have 36 out there. And what we do is we would now, as Lieutenant Parrish mentioned, there's obviously the heat map, which you have. We would start with those areas. And basically those areas are 2 and 5 precincts, which are in the Linden area, 13 precinct, which is the south end, and 19 precinct, which is the hilltop. We would train all those officers, and those cruisers would get AEDs as the starting point for this. They'd already have, as part of the hands-only training CPR, we would give that AED training so they'd already be trained so they can immediately deploy these. And the goal, obviously, would be to see how these areas do, and if we show it's beneficial, then the goal would be to expand that potentially to every cruiser in the city, which is really about 400 or 500 vehicles. So if you think about the mobility that would offer, and the AEDs in those cruisers, it would be a huge asset to the community. So now I'll pass it back over to Dr. Kecak.
Thank you, Lieutenant. I was privileged to chair the Charitable Foundation subcommittee. So as we consider sudden cardiac arrest to be a public health epidemic, and we know what's successful in treating sudden cardiac arrest, We feel that our efforts here in Columbus must be made to increase the number of individuals who know how to do hands-only CPR and to strategically deploy those AEDs in the locations that Lieutenant Parrish mentioned. So in order to coordinate these things, and more importantly, to pay for them, our subcommittee recommends that a standalone and independent 501c3 charitable foundation be set up to achieve these goals and objectives of our HeartSafe Columbus Task Force. We have recommended, because of the legacy here in Columbus celebrating 50 years of EMS, that this foundation be called the Columbus Heartmobile Foundation. If you don't know what the Heartmobile is, it's a very important piece of Columbus history. A Winnebago vehicle that went out from the Heart Shack on OSU's grounds and basically treated heart attack victims before we knew, basically as a paramedic, what to do with heart attacks. And we trained our firefighters how to do that, and we really laid the groundwork nationally and worldwide for what is now our EMS system. So we have a rich legacy here in Columbus in terms of establishing that. So here's what that foundation will do. It will work to institute the following. First of all, strategic placement of AEDs in our community, expanded training in the general population for hands-only CPR, encouraging legislation that identifies and mandates target locations for AED placement, equipping our first responders and EMS personnel with the latest and most impactful training and innovations for treating victims of cardiac arrest, working with our hospital partners to ensure the best life-saving efforts, and developing key metrics to assess progress towards meeting these stated goals. So what we don't want to do is have a whole lot of, bluster and excitement and enthusiasm and get all set, and then 6 months from now or 1 year from now or 10 years from now not see these efforts come into fruition. We have a great model for the foundation. It's called the Medic One Foundation out in Seattle. They have the highest rate of survival for sudden cardiac arrest, and it's not any magic that occurs. It's basically they have invested in their community to make sure that everyone knows CPR and that they have AEDs strategically placed. So we know what works. Now we need to establish the groundwork so that we can finance these efforts going into decades upon decades of life here in Columbus. So in summary, the Columbus Heartmobile Foundation would be the financial and administrative engine to facilitate these recommendations of the HeartSafe Columbus Task Force. And so, may I introduce to you our Associate Medical Director, Dr. Eric Cortez, who chaired the EMS Hospital Subcommittee.
Thank you, Dr. Kecak, and thank you to Councilmember Brown for the opportunity to discuss the EMS and Hospital Subcommittee of the Cardiac Arrest Task Force. As you have recently heard, cardiac arrest is a public health problem requiring a multidisciplinary approach to improve survival with good outcomes. EMS and hospitals play an essential role in delivering basic and advanced care for cardiac arrest patients. The best chance for survival of this fatal condition is early and timely recognition and treatment. For the Division of Fire, this begins during the 911 call and dispatch. Our professionals in the fire alarm office are trained to detect when an individual is suffering from a cardiac arrest by only asking a few questions. They're also trained to instruct callers to perform bystander CPR and utilize an AED if possible. These seemingly simple tasks have proven potential to substantially increase survival. Our EMTs and paramedics arrive within 5 to 6 minutes of receiving the 911 call and deliver advanced care while en route to the hospital. Lastly, our hospital partners continue our resuscitative efforts and in select cases are able to offer innovative and potentially life-saving treatment. The purpose of the EMS and Hospital Subcommittee is to assure quality cardiac arrest care from the time 911 is activated through definitive care in the hospital setting. We'll be focusing on 3 main objectives. Number 1, maintaining a continuous quality improvement database that will help improve our care of cardiac arrest patients. Number 2, advising the task force on the latest developments in cardiac arrest research and new resuscitative strategies. And number 3, supporting the Division of Fire and participating hospitals in cardiac arrest research projects. Our subcommittee is composed of representatives from the Division of Fire as well as each of the 4 healthcare systems in Columbus and Central Ohio. Using a collaborative approach with our hospital partners, we plan to study and assess several cardiac arrest quality parameters as well as patient outcome data to not only assure high-quality care, but also to identify and develop innovative strategies for improving survival with good outcomes. In summary, a successful resuscitation from cardiac arrest involves every part of our medical system operating flawlessly, from 911 call through definitive care in the hospital. This committee's goal is to assure the residents of Columbus have the highest quality of care and best chance of survival from cardiac arrest. Thank you for your time. I have the honor of introducing Grant Ames from the Legislative Subcommittee.
Thank you, Dr. Cortez. So the Legislative Subcommittee identified 3 goals to guide our recommendations. First, we would recommend legislation that will be effective in increasing the rate of survival from cardiac arrest. Second will be to identify community stakeholders to ensure recommended legislation and more broadly, the task force recommendations are impactful. And finally, recommend legislation that will allocate public funding to the HeartSafe Columbus initiative. As our subcommittee began to examine our first goal, we researched legislation from peer cities to Columbus, including Jacksonville, Florida, Chicago, Illinois, Indianapolis, Indiana, St. Paul, Minnesota, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Memphis, Tennessee. Through our research, we identified that legislation from these peer cities fit into 3 categories. 1, being legislation created to limit liability and create protections for bystanders that engage in CPR and or deploy an AED. Second, legislation that mandates placement of AEDs in high risk areas. And third, legislation that requires AED Registry with the local Division of Fire and or a university partner. Based on these categories, our committee examined the effectiveness of potential legislation to be enacted by the city. While researching the first category, we found that current provisions in the Ohio Revised Code provide adequate liability protections for bystanders that perform CPR and or deploy an AED on the victim of a sudden cardiac arrest. As our subcommittee discussed the requirement of placement of AEDs in high-risk areas, based on recommendations from Krisha Alk from the American Heart Association, we deemed this requirement to be ineffective in peer cities. Seeing that entities that were required to place AEDs at their businesses or community centers had limited limited training for their employees, did not inform their employees of where the AED was located, and also when the AED was not well maintained. So when it was needed for an emergency, they were not in the adequate position to be effective. Therefore, our committee's recommendation is to engage community stakeholders in a voluntary program, as was discussed earlier, to try to push AEDs out in the community in a different way. Finally, our committee does recommend to look into the third portion of what our peer cities have seen. We recommend that the City of Columbus explore an ordinance that requires AED owners whose devices are accessible to the public to register those devices with the Columbus Division of Fire. As was said by Chief Ballard earlier, certainly it's an effective tool for our dispatchers to be able to use to inform residents that are responding and those bystanders that are there doing CPR of where they can locate the closest AED, and we feel like that would be very effective to be able to do. Certainly, the next goal that our group worked through was to look at what our stakeholders were. We looked into identifying stakeholders in our 3 priority neighborhoods, as has been explained, of the Hilltop, Linden, and the South Side, as well as business and faith leaders to engage their groups to make sure that we're both getting people that know CPR as well as having AEDs at their locations. Finally, Councilmember Mitchell Brown has graciously offered to provide $100,000 in seed funding for the initiatives of this subcommittee to look into implementing the initiatives that have been discussed. The next steps will be to explore legislation further and engage community stakeholders, both business groups and faith leaders, to make sure that the entire initiative is effective. And with that, I will happily introduce Battalion Chief Steve Martin, who is the chairman of the Public Information Subcommittee.
Thank you. Councilmember Brown, Councilmember Remy, thank you very much for having me and getting all this together. As far as the Public Information Subcommittee, the goals as far as public information component of this plan is to inform, educate, and assure our residents of the issue of sudden cardiac arrests and how we as a community can improve the chances of survival. We need to expand our current messaging in the area of how to identify a person in crisis, what to do with the victim, how to access tools and help, and as Mrs. Hogan pointed out, to give them encouragement for people to become part of the chain of survival. So many people are intimidated by taking action. They think a phone call is all, or maybe they see somebody doing CPR and they think it's been handled and they kind of melt in the background. We want everybody to become involved and be part of this. As far as recommendations, we have already, as the Division of Fire, developed a multifaceted system of communication with the residents of Central Ohio as far as fire safety messages. We have also developed communication strategies for our Office of Recruitment, Diversity, and Inclusion. So what we are looking to do is expand these proven methods of communication to, of disseminating information for the public for no-cost media. So this would be our website, this would be our social media, Columbus Television, CTV, which is recording this event for us, and public service announcements. We are also looking to identify a budget for media that is not free to us, such as marketing material, print advertisements, and radio spots. As far as next steps, we are working to partner with local businesses and agencies such as CODA to advertise on their buses and bus stops. The Columbus College of Art and Design, we hope to partner with them to develop locally produced infographics which will convey our message at a glance to everybody, whether or not they speak English. The American Heart Association has done a lot of the groundwork already. We hope to continue to partner with them and use what they've already got. And then also to get our information to local hospitals and doctors' offices, where there's already people that are sitting in waiting rooms looking for something to read, and we have an opportunity to capture that audience. As far as how this affects the community, we are hoping that by pushing out accurate information, we can accomplish a few things. We want to eliminate the fear of taking action by instilling confidence to our residents to know that they can do this and they can make a difference. We want to make the steps of notifying 911, push hard, push fast, and use an AED to be as memorable as stop, drop, and roll. We want people to know about hands-only CPR, and that mouth-to-mouth is not necessary to save a life. We want to encourage everybody with a smartphone to download Pulse Point, a free app that will notify a person that if he or she is within a few hundred yards of somebody that needs help, they can take action, because somebody on the first floor may not know that there's something going on directly above them on the second floor. And we want everyone to know what an AED is and that they can use it as easily as operating a microwave oven. I would like to add that I appreciate all of you being here today and the fact that you cared enough about this to show up today. I know all of you will want to download the Pulse Point app before you leave here. So after this is over, I'm happy to stand in the back of the room and make sure I can help you in downloading that app. With that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Kecak.
Thank you, Chief Martin. I just would like to thank Councilmember Brown for facilitating the formation of this task force and just for the honor of designating me as the chair. I think you can see from our reports that we had just a great level of talent at our subcommittee chair positions. But if you look at this recommendations here, we had 30 members on the task force, and they came from hospitals and organizations and city administration and our fire department, of course, and the American Red Cross and AHA. And it was one of the most enjoyable task force I've had the pleasure of being associated with. We didn't have any fistfights. There was a general spirit of collaboration and cooperation. And I think that you can see from the level of quality of these reports that we have a really great product here that we need to allow our public to experience. And so we do thank you for being here today, and we hope that you'll be our supporters as we try to roll this out as a lasting legacy for our city so that we can have more and more people saved from sudden cardiac arrest. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Kecak. I've been joined by my colleague Emmanuel Remy. So, Emmanuel, would you like to make a few comments?
Sure thing. Just want to thank the committee and Councilmember Brown's office for doing this important work. This is something that obviously affects a significant portion of the city of Columbus on a regular basis. I just downloaded the Pulse Point app, and I'm looking at actually a lot of emergency runs for this afternoon. So very informative. And so, but we hope that we get as much of the public aware and involved with this. And I want to thank Councilmember Brown for seeding this important endeavor. And so our office will be happy to help, and certainly we'll, as a council, will be looking to be fully supportive. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to offer Deputy Director of the Department of Public Safety, Kate Pishotti, to say a few words.
Thank you. On behalf of the Safety Director, Ned Pettis Jr., I just wanted to thank Councilmember Mitchell Brown for hosting this hearing and putting this important work out into the spotlight. I'd also like to recognize the excellent work that Dr. Kecak, along with the entire task force, have done in such a short period of time. This project has been an excellent example of the good things that can happen when the public and private sectors join forces. And we're excited to watch how this partnership grows. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I'd like to ask Chief of Fire, Kevin O'Connor, to offer some comments. Chief?
Thank you, Councilmember Brown, Councilmember Ramey. One of the things I want to make sure everyone understands is Columbus Division of Fire is ready, willing, and able to assist in anything we can do with this. We already offer public education in regards to hands-only CPR training. We offer that to anyone that asks. All you have to do is give the Division of Fire a call. We go out, and this Friday, we'll actually be doing hands-only CPR training at the plaza in front of Nationwide Arena as part of EMS Week. But really what I want to say is the fact that this committee's work is exemplifying the fact that it's going to take neighbors to save neighborhoods, because those are the people, and that's where these incidents are occurring. When we can put AEDs on the street and we can train people in every neighborhood to know that they can help their neighbor, that's what best is about the people of Columbus. They know that the Columbus Division of Fire is always there, but it takes us 4 to 7 minutes on average to respond to the scene, and none of us want to hold our breath for 4 to 7 minutes. The reality is your neighbor can help save you, and you can save your neighbor with some very simple steps. That's everything from the Pulse Point app to learning hands-only CPR, and to be ready, willing, and able to know how to activate the system. It starts at the very second that person goes down, and it needs everyone to be involved. So if Columbus wants to be a lead city, and I know it does, then every neighbor has to get involved, and that's what this committee is about, and that's what we're willing to support in any way we can. Please just let us know how.
Thank you, Chief. And also I'd like to invite Kimber Perfect for some comments, please. Kimber is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Mayor Andrew Ginther. Kimber?
Thank you, Chairman Brown, Councilman Remy, Dr. Kecak, and members of the task force. And thank you so much for this great work to each of you and your 30-member committee. Nearly 2 years ago, without warning, I suffered sudden cardiac arrest while walking down the street just 2 blocks from where we are today. My event was a classic case of what you all refer to as the chain of survival. A bystander who was walking behind me immediately called 911, where an astute firefighter on the other end of the line not only dispatched EMS, but calmly coached the caller and other bystanders on hands-only CPR. Those compressions during the critical first few minutes of my event prior to the arrival of EMS played a huge role in my survival, as did an AED, which was utilized 3 times by the Columbus Division of Fire Medics, who revived me on that sidewalk. And then, with the precision and care of a well-trained and well-equipped fire division, I was fortunate to have this happen in Columbus, Ohio. I know that every day of my life. These medics then rushed me to Grant Medical Center, where I once again suffered sudden cardiac arrest. For me, in this most terrible moment of my life, everything happened in the right sequence, and the right people and the right equipment was there, all of it. But I know that this is not the case that this is the case in only a fraction of the hundreds of incidents of sudden cardiac arrests that occur each year in our community, as Chairman Brown has noted. Only 10 to 12% of us survive. Gail and I are very fortunate among that 10 to 12%. But it's also a heart-wrenching statistic for me to contemplate, and I know it is for Gail. But I am encouraged today. I'm encouraged to see the numerous initiatives that this task force has identified to ensure more life-saving interventions that I know will increase survival rates of sudden cardiac arrest in our community. And if I may, sir, I would like to highlight a few. First, the strategic placement of AEDs and AED registrations with the Columbus Division of Fire. An AED brought me back to life 3 times on the street. It took 3 times utilizing the AED, and of course there was other equipment involved. You all know everything else that was utilized. So first on the street, but then 30 minutes later at Grant Hospital, an AED again saved my life. I would not be standing here before you today without the utilization of AEDs. Nearly two years ago, June 8th, it'll be 2 years. And from where I collapsed on that street, I could look today and see a dozen businesses, including a hotel right across the street. And so had there been an AED registry, firefighter Kevin Snyder, who was the wonderful, astute person answering the call in the fire office that day, he could have also dispatched somebody to go get an AED. We are trained in CPR, as firefighter Kelly knows. I learned this from him. If you have other people around, first you call 911, you start the compressions, but if there are other people around, you send them off to get the AED. Well, that could have been very helpful on that day on the street for firefighter Snyder to have that information. So I want to encourage Columbus City Council, gentlemen, to pass legislation that would require that AED registration. I feel that it certainly would result in the deployment of many, many more AEDs prior to the arrival of EMS personnel. Additionally, I want to commend the task force for identifying priority neighborhoods with high rates of cardiac arrest. While I know this focus will not limit engagement in our other Columbus neighborhoods, increased AED placement and CPR training in targeted neighborhoods that have already been mentioned, I know will have a substantial impact on our city's survival rates. And then some additional initiatives that you all have talked about, the general population hands-only CPR, also will have an enormous impact. I had numerous bystanders who did jump to my aid. I've listened to my 911 call, and it sounds like there was a small village gathered around me. But key in all of that was what firefighter Snyder was coaching on. As soon as he heard I was starting to turn blue, he said, somebody needs to start compressions now. Can you do that? Put your phone on speaker. I can coach anybody through this. And he just started coaching. And the gentleman, not the 911 caller, but the gentleman who jumped in and started doing compressions, there was a certain point where he asked this person on this phone who he could not see, so do I have to give mouth to mouth? And he was told no, and I'm sure he was quite relieved at that. But anyway, I just know that if hands-only CPR was more broadly known, right after this happened to me, once I was able, I was in Firefighter Kelly's class getting CPR myself, and he's just reminded me today, it's my 2-year anniversary, so it's time for me to renew my certificate. So, with the life-saving interventions I received on that most spectacular June morning nearly 2 years ago, I lived to see another day. Gail and I are both living proof that being completely fine 1 minute and then collapsing the next, which is often the case, as you all know, with sudden cardiac arrest, this does not need to lead to death. Thank you, Chairman Brown, Councilman Remy, gentlemen, for convening, Dr. Kecak, for convening the task force, and thank you for these most thoughtful and comprehensive recommendations you have made to our city. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Kimber. At this moment, I'm going to entertain public speakers. At this time, we'll take the public comment, and I'll call the name of the individuals that filled out a speaker slip in the order at which they were turned in. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. Please share your name, address, and any organization you represent before you begin your statement. Dr. Ashish Panchal.
Chair Brown, council members, and committee members, my name is Ashish Panchal. I'm an emergency physician at Ohio State University, as well, and I live at 6808 Enfield Trace in Dublin. So the reason I'm coming and speaking today is first to kind of give you a little bit of my background and tell you what my perspective of what we're talking about HeartSafe Columbus. So being an emergency physician is a big part of my life, but I'm also an EMS physician and an EMS medical director, but more so I am a resuscitation researcher. For the American Heart Association, I am the chair of the cardiac arrest guidelines for the last 2 years, and have been involved with American Heart Association and the national guidelines for cardiac arrest for the last about 8 to 10 years. So this is a large part of my life, and what my focus is the resuscitation of people who suffer cardiac arrest. As a resuscitation researcher, one of the big things for me is understanding the depth of the challenge that we face. And to cut to kind of the chase of what we're facing is the challenge for our future is implementation. In a very real way, HeartSafe Columbus is addressing that unbelievably large challenge that we do face. We recognize that when somebody has a cardiac arrest event, that minutes count. And the slope that you see in the third slide there is the scary slope. It goes straight down, and very quickly people are non-functional. And that's really challenging piece is that individuals are going to enter our system from so many different places. They could be in the community, they could be seen by EMS, or a firefighter, or a police officer, or even in the hospital setting. And all these areas are needed to actually work together. In the fifth slide that I've given you there, this whole system that we've already started talking about, the system of cardiac resuscitation is so important, but amazingly enough, unlike other systems of hospital care or medical care, this system starts with bystanders. It starts with our community. It starts with our families. 70% of cardiac arrests occur in the home. So the people that we're going to interface with are going to be our family members, our loved ones. And the scary thing is we recognize that the survival is low, 10%. But when we really look into the data itself, and I would direct you to the 7th slide, there's tons of variabilities in not only survival rates from city to city, but also the performance of bystander CPR. But we recognize that Seattle, as an example, if you make real focused effort at improving what you do for bystander CPR, AED use, and really engaging your community, that's where so much change happens and so much impact happens. At Ohio State University, we've been truly committed to improving the outcomes for cardiac arrest for a number of years. From the beginnings where we helped with the Heartmobile, all the way to more recent trials where we've looked at using mechanical chest compression devices. Even today, we're still pushing forward with so many of the efforts that can really change outcomes. Currently, we are sponsoring and investing into the OSU Wexner Medical Center Cardiac Arrest Internship Program, who are training undergrads to go out in our community. And to this date, we've trained over 12,000 people how to do CPR in our community. It is an exciting piece to see these young people excited and getting out there to really make tri-standards. Not people who are going to just stand around, but people who are going to make a difference and save a life. We've had multiple grants for CPR performance in high-risk neighborhoods, and we've used GIS mapping that you see in your packet to really identify these high-risk neighborhoods that we need to target. We've developed new paradigms for bystander CPR and intention-focused bystander CPR to increase that, as well as improving in-hospital care and having research projects to improve delivery of care, from having a randomized controlled trial of pulse point, as well as extracorporeal CPR paradigms. Much of this work is done with the amazing partnership that we have with Columbus Fire. When all is said and done, the biggest thing that's going to change the paradigm of what we do in our city is bystander response. It's going to be making these individuals who previously did not know what's going on into people who are really engaged, who really want to make a difference and respond to that very simple prompt. If somebody suddenly collapses, I do something. And when all is said and done, we recognize at Ohio State, and I would refer you to the 15th slide, that everyone can do CPR, even Brutus. And we have got him well engaged, and we have children who are learning how to do CPR, and we know these high-risk communities are out there. When all is said and done, the first step for really changing the dynamics of what we see in our community and the leadership of Columbus Fire when it comes to really changing the dynamic is here today with HeartSafe Columbus. Because really, when it comes down to it, the only outcome that we're going to follow is really simple: the lives saved and the brain saved. It's not just lives, it's neurologically intact survival. And that's what bystander CPR and AED use get you. When all is said and done, my mission, I know the American Heart Association's mission and Ohio State's mission is that no one should die from cardiac arrest. And today, with all the great work that all of you are doing, we're moving in that direction. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for appearing this afternoon. Ms. Sally Morgan. Thank you, Ms. Morgan.
Good afternoon. I'm Sally Morgan, and I live at 7167 Pebbleway Court, Columbus. I am honored to be here today to represent the American Heart Association. As a healthcare provider, a Columbus citizen, a family member, and a volunteer for the American Heart Association, I welcome and support this legislation that you're presenting today. 911 is a number that we all know, a number we teach our children at a very young age. It is the gateway to our emergency response system, a system we rely on when our loved ones are in danger. 911 calls vary in purpose, from car accidents to house fires to heart attacks or cardiac arrest. The person who answers the phone when you call is a vital link when minutes matter. This is especially true with cardiac arrest or sudden cardiac arrest, which is the sudden, unexpected loss of heart function, breathing, and consciousness, and is commonly the result of electrical disturbance in the heart. Each year, an estimated 350,000 cardiac arrests occur in the United States outside of the hospital setting. There are an estimated 600 here in Central Ohio each year. Almost all of these events result in a call to help to 911. Unless CPR and defibrillation are started quickly, death from sudden cardiac arrest is certain. In cases of cardiac arrest, the American Heart Association supports efforts to increase CPR training, including hands-only, provided by dispatchers, and I think we've heard today how successful that is. While Columbus already provides this, efforts are underway at the state level to ensure this is uniform across the state. To increase survival rates, the American Heart Association supports Columbus legislation that will develop an AED registry to quickly inform 911 callers where to access an AED and provide funding for nonprofit organizations in neighborhoods of greatest need to increase placements of AEDs. While we have current community sponsor or partnerships focused on distributing CPR Anytime kits to train residents in CPR, we are also support coordinated expansion of efforts in those neighborhoods where more cardiac arrests are occurring and furthering training in CPR and AED use. The Columbus HeartSafe legislation recommendations are important steps to increase survival from cardiac arrest. First, recognition and activation of the emergency response system, followed by immediate high-quality CPR, rapid defibrillation, basic and advanced emergency medical services, and then advanced life support and post-arrest care. The American Heart Association is pleased to be able to work with Councilman Mitchell Brown and the Columbus Fire Department to assess the data around cardiac arrests in our city and to develop educational and policy recommendations to further improve cardiac arrest outcomes. I personally want to thank Councilman Brown, the Columbus Fire Department, and the HeartSafe Columbus Taskforce for these recommendations to improve survival in Columbus from sudden cardiac arrest. Thank you. And I'll be really honest, I have no idea near my home where there might be an AED. So I too would support this on a personal level. Thank you.
Yes. And also we have Ms. Marty Grace. Marty?
My name is Marty Grace. I live at 1548 Fairwood Avenue. I am one of the commissioners on the south side, where all the cardiac arrests happen. We have a machine at our church. We worked through Mount Carmel East and got the blood pressure and all of those fancy gizmos and things. We had 1 day of training, and I can tell you today, I could not use that machine if I had to. So I think that what you're doing is great, but we need more training, better training than we've had. I used to be a CPR instructor at the Red Cross, but I let it go. But when they were teaching us at the church how to do it, the guy said I was doing it right, which surprised me. So I'm in full agreement with what you're doing, and I think that it would be great to have more information out in the public so that the public can know what's available to them and where they could go or get the type of help they would need. I was teasing the firefighter that I live on Fairwood, and every night they wake me up because they're going to going past my house, and at certain times of the night, there's some type of a alarm that they use on their thing, and it causes my dog to howl. So, saying all of that, I appreciate what the fire department does for our community. They've been great. The one on Livingston, right across from Rhodes, should get an award because I'm telling you, those people run day and night past my house. So thank you for allowing me to speak, and I think that what you're doing is great.
Thank you, Marty. In closing, and I'll make some personal comments here, I'm overwhelmingly impressed by the recommendations submitted by the committee. I am most excited about the collaborative effort this committee has demonstrated. In Columbus, we talk about the Columbus way. What better methodology than trying to figure out a way to save people's lives if you're going to implement the Columbus way? Combining the efforts of the Columbus Division of Fire, Columbus Division of Police, the American Heart Association, the American Red Cross, the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, the Ohio Health, Mount Carmel Health System, the Columbus Department of Public Health, City Attorney's Office, the Columbus Department of Public Safety, is what truly makes this effort special. It is only through the collaboration of our entire community that we can enhance survival rates from out-of-hospital sudden cardiac arrest. I'd also like to recognize the members of the committee and in the community that are present this evening or this afternoon. It is important that our community work in a collaborative way to find a solution to this particular problem. Specifically, I have to express my gratitude to Dr. David Kecak. When I talked to Dr. Kecak about taking on this endeavor 4 months ago, I think it was 4 months ago, he didn't shy away. He was aggressive and hungry to try and step up to the plate to take a look at the problem in a collaborative format. Certainly, to thank Director Ned Pettis Jr. from Public Safety, and Fire Chief O'Connor, and the Police Chief Tom Quinlan, and Health Commissioner Mashika Roberts for their support. But I will take personal privilege here to first and foremost say thank you to Gail and to Kimber. I am the oldest paramedic in this room. I started in emergency medicine a long time ago. I remember when Columbus had the Heartmobile, when I was in Pittsburgh, as we were also engaging in the performance of CPR and taking emergency care to the citizens rather than the citizens to the care. I've come full circle. My mentor, Dr. Peter Saffer at the University of Pittsburgh, was very, very proud of me to say, I appreciate what you've done. What's important for all of us, learning CPR, it's not important that we know it. It's important that your family members and your friends know CPR. I often joke that I taught my wife and my daughter just in case anything should happen to me. My wife checked out our life insurance policy first, but I said, okay, I understand. I can save their lives. I want to make sure that they could save mine. It's important from that perspective about bystander CPR. When I say I was involved in emergency medicine a long time ago, I was in Seattle, Washington in the 1970s. And I remember when they were doing what they were doing about emergency medicine. And I was impressed. 1 in every 4 citizens in the city of Seattle knows CPR. 1 in every 8 or 9 citizens in the city of Columbus knows CPR. We have to improve on that number. You've heard this afternoon that bystander CPR makes a difference. Well, undeniably, it does. It's not that difficult. And the engagement and knowing how rapidly our fire division is going to respond will make a difference. And the fact that our police division is getting engaged, and the fact that they're already on the scene quite often, and not to stand around because it's a medical emergency, but to get engaged and to do something. Not only with CPR, but also, again, with the opioid crisis that we have going on right now in our country. But the more you know about CPR and the benefits that it can bring to you, the better off you are. The recommendations that the committee has put together, I will be sharing certainly with all of my colleagues on council. I'll also be sharing it with the mayor. He and I have already talked about this issue. And as you've already heard from my legislative aide, I've already committed $100,000 to this particular effort. My objective is now to go out and speak to members of the community to talk about the Columbus way and to get them more actively engaged in what we can do. Last night, Parrish threw out the first pitch at the Clippers game. I think it made it all the way to home plate. I'm not sure, but I know he gave it his best shot, Chief. So we'll take that. To educate more and more people about CPR. Believe it or not, for every sporting event that has a population of over 20,000 people, at least 2 people in that audience is experiencing some type of cardiac experience. Believe it or not. And so when you figure that Ohio State at a football game, we got 107,000 people, how many individuals in that particular arena are experiencing some type of cardiac experience? They may or may not know about it, but it could be sudden. And then subsequently, the fact that we have fire at those games, but the person standing next to them initiates the activity immediately. That improves the probability of success for that person surviving that cardiac event. I know that because I have done it. And I know it from the standpoint in the sense of being able to talk to people like Kimber and Gail who experience sudden cardiac arrest and are sitting here today and able to speak to the fact that it does work. Bystander CPR makes a difference. And now with AEDs, it enhances that probability even more so. I travel a lot, and my wife gets on my case because whenever I go to the airport, the first thing I look at is where's the AED. It's that case with me in that when I stay at a hotel, I ask the question. I don't go and stay above the 8th floor because fire apparatus can't get above the 8th floor. I can be real obnoxious when I travel, unfortunately. My wife knows that about me. But by the same token, she knows that I'm concerned about her health and her well-being. And when I bring the subject matter up, the hotel personnel say, oh my God, who, really? I said, just asking the general question, just to make sure you're up to speed on it. But that's what we have to do. That's what we have to do. A year from now, when we're sitting down and we're having a discussion with OSU about the research that's been done, we want to be able to show that it's not just 12% that have been saved. All right, let's shoot for a higher number. I'm not going to say what the number is, but let's be better than that. I want to compete against Seattle, Washington, where they've got 1 in 4. Why can't we at least achieve 1 in 4? We got a population now of 900,000 people in the city of Columbus. All right, then let's figure out what we can do to make sure we educate more and more people about the probability, because you can make a difference in saving someone's life. And believe me, there is nothing greater. There is nothing greater than being able to say you did something when someone had a problem and then to see them later on. It warms your heart like nothing ever can. And these firefighters and the personnel and Dr. Kecak and Dr. Panchal, they deal with it all the time. But the rest of us, to have an appreciation to be involved in that is really, really special. So I'm going to close. I can tell you that we're going to take the recommendations and see what we can do about implementing them and making it all happen. Dr. K are going to take this on the road to talk to some different agencies around the country, around the city, about engagement and spending some money to get AEDs in the proper locations. And between the two of us, we're pretty convincing. They would have a difficult time saying no to us. And if anybody else wants to get involved, please feel free to contact me. My office number for those who are watching is 614-645-4605. And thanks everyone for coming this afternoon. Enjoy your afternoon.